I would just now like to introduce you to your presenter for today. Sandra Jane is the course tutor for the CDN Learn Online Teaching in Colleges Today programme. One of our team of CDN advisors, Sandra Jane has experience and knowledge of teaching, learning and assessment in addition to qualification development and delivery. I would now just like to hand you across to Sandra Jane, who will begin today's webinar session with her presentation.
Thank you very much for that introduction, George, and welcome to everybody today. Just a little bit of background. I became interested in cooperative learning as far back as 2007 when I first attended a training session that was offered by a lady called Sherry Hopton, who at that time taught at Dundee Angus College. And it's been something that I've been quite passionate about since. In terms of what we're doing today, what would be really helpful is if you could indicate in the chat box just your current level of knowledge about cooperative learning as a learning and teaching approach, and give us an indication if you either currently use or have used this teaching and learning approach within your classes up till now. That'd be really helpful, folks. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for that, everybody. And it's nice to see that we've got a mix of people who are already using it and on a regular basis, which is fantastic. So thank you for that, Christine. And also people that are interested in learning more about it. It is something that there's quite a bit of a buzz about. So what are we going to be concentrating on in today's session? Well, today there was 3 things that I wanted to try to do within this webinar. First of all, I'm anticipating that some of you might not know very much about it. I wanted to give you just a little bit of a flavour about some of the basic elements and principles of cooperative learning, and also to talk about the differences between traditional group learning, as perhaps many of you know and recognise it, and cooperative learning. Just to highlight some of the key aspects that you should be thinking about if you wish to use this as a teaching approach. And we will be touching on how you would actually plan and manage and structure cooperative learning activities. But today's webinar will not go into a description of the naming of different activities such as jigsaw or techniques, because one of my other colleagues here, Gary Cameron, is running a webinar as part of his Power Up Your Theory sessions next month that will cover aspects of those. So that hopefully will address quite a few of your needs. Okay, so in terms of a little bit of a background about why cooperative learning and why now, what kind of led to this, this interest in this subject? Well, the International Commission report, Learning the Treasure Within, although it was produced for UNESCO several years ago in 1996, the findings still resonate and impact on education today and also on education for the future. They identified these 4 key objectives or pillars of education within the document, and it's a document you should still be able to access on the web for those who are interested in finding out a bit more. And these 4 pillars of education parallel the Scottish Government ambitions for a Scotland that embraces diversity and also follows and is aligned with the underlying principles of Scottish education as we know it today through initiatives such as Curriculum for Excellence. Globalisation is profoundly affecting the world of work and also education, and this has had a major impact on both what and how we teach all our learners. This can be seen in the growing number of people completing MOOCs or other online programmes of learning in their own time, in the use of college virtual learning environments, and many of these use discussion forums and other means to foster the social aspect of peer-to-peer learning. In today's world and our modern economy, many people are working and also socialising in teams of people who are based in other locations and even other countries. And because of this change, intercultural literacy and technological literacy can be viewed as equally important aspects of lifelong learning and personal development. So key questions for educators I would suggest are, how much interaction takes place And what is the quality of student-to-student interaction in your classes currently? How are you trying to develop students' creative thinking as they are learning? To what extent do you create opportunities for students to learn to cooperate with others in the class or within other classes, and students perhaps who they don't necessarily like or actually know, as we know that working effectively in teams is a key skill that is necessary within the modern workforce? And how can you help your students understand that together they can learn much more than they can by themselves, and both see and value diversity within the class or group? So what exactly is cooperative learning? Well, just a brief recap, as I say, for some of you who have only recently heard about or are starting your cooperative learning journey. Some common questions that often come up when talking to others about this teaching and learning approach are, well, so it's just group work, right? Is that not the case? Or putting my students into groups? You've got to be kidding, that would be chaos. Well, Education Scotland describe collaborative and cooperative learning as being an approach that promotes the idea that learning is best served when students have opportunities to learn with and from each other and are shown how to do so effectively. Cooperative learning is much, much more than merely having students sit together, helping other students do their work. Cooperative learning is a very structured form of group work, where groups of students have to work together purposefully to achieve a common goal or goals, which would be very difficult to obtain if students were either working alone or if they were working in competition with each other. So what's it not? Well, it's not getting students to finish their work early to help others within the class. And it's not setting up a group of students to work together unless you can ensure that all of the students will contribute their fair share to the end product. So for example, in Reflections on the Engagement of Student Teachers with Cooperative Learning, the Institute for Teacher Education MSc programme says, just by working groups does not mean that social skills will develop automatically, so we need to plan for these things within our learning. So let's have a quick look at some of the principles that lie behind cooperative learning, commonly known as PIEs, and you will see there are 4: positive interdependence, individual responsibility, equal participation, and simultaneous interaction. And as with curriculum excellence, again, we have common principles, and I would argue that they're actually very closely aligned to some of those principles of CFE. One of the key things about cooperative learning is that the success of a group is more difficult or impossible to achieve without each member actively contributing to achieving that shared common goal. So it's really about a process of sinking or swimming together, and that fosters that reliance on others and also that kind of caring aspect of feeling that you're actually in it together. Each member of the group is responsible and also accountable to others within the group, and each member has a clear and defined role and responsibility for making sure the task is actually achieved. And that includes personal responsibility, not just to achieve the goal, but to actively take part and to listen and to respond appropriately to others. Robert Slavin at Johns Hopkins University examined cooperative learning studies, and his research found that when individual accountability was combined with positive interdependence, it actually raised achievement and attainment in almost every instance within that piece of research. If individual accountability was not present, the results were mixed, and there were often no positive results or any impact on student achievement. And that is one of the key things that we're trying to ensure happens within the classrooms today. In cooperative learning, everybody has something important and valuable to do within the group, and everyone needs to contribute and participate for the group to complete the task and achieve their goals. I think if you were to ask, most people would probably admit that if they knew that they were going to be held accountable for their own individual performance, they're more motivated and usually try harder than when they know no one will see how much they've learned or how well they can perform. I know that's certainly the case for myself. In terms of key people that have been working within this area, Dr. Spencer Kagan is a former professor of psychology and education at the University of California in Berkeley. He's a key American educationalist who's been promoting the use of cooperative learning, and his research has been very, very extensive, and it's been focused on establishing classrooms that are harmonious, promoting responsible behaviour with learners, and improving students' social skills, the qualities of their character, and also raising academic achievement. And he also reinforces this view. When we tell students this will be in the test, they perk up and take better notes. So why is this the case? Well, they know they'll be held accountable for that content. On their own, they will take a required test. If we told them during the test that they can ask others for help, they are likely to be less motivated to master the content. So within cooperative learning activities, there's really no place to hide, and learners can't choose to sit back and take a back seat and let others do all the work. They have to actively discuss, negotiate, and reach consensus with others. Cooperative learning, one of the key premises behind this is about the focus of intercultural versus intracultural learning. And Mark Hayward is another international education consultant, and as far back as 2002, he defined intercultural literacy as a multidimensional construct, including the competencies, understandings, attitudes, language proficiencies, participation, and identities that are necessary for successful living and working in a cross-cultural environment. And that really resonates with the Scotland that I see about me on a day-to-day basis, and also with that opening slide with the International Commission for Education in the 21st Century. To Hayward, an interculturally literate person is able to effectively read a second culture, interpret its symbols, and negotiate its meanings in a practical day-to-day context. And he argues that a lack of intercultural literacy leads to misunderstandings and blunders that can be extremely costly to both individuals and organisations. And you might well have experience of some of those situations depending on the types of programmes you've watched on TV recently, or also your own experience. So what then is intercultural learning? Well, intercultural learning develops and occurs when individuals experience or participate in a cross-cultural situation or activity, which provides them with the opportunity to confront and challenge their views and opinions. And that is best achieved through a diverse classroom and by structuring groups where you put people together with different views, backgrounds, and circumstances. And they need to be designed in such a way that enables equal participation from all group members, from people from different cultures and backgrounds. If this happens, learners' awareness of both their own and foreign cultures increases, but also their own value systems as well. And they're also given an opportunity to develop a wide range of associated skills, behaviours, and communication skills, which eventually help them form transcultural or global identities. And for these reasons, cooperative learning is one key way to practice intercultural competencies, breaking down stereotypes and views, and giving everyone in your classes improved access to the learning process. Another key premise behind cooperative learning is the importance of the class atmosphere. And most lecturers hope that their classes have a good, positive atmosphere. But what do we actually do to create it? Well, firstly, I believe it's really important to lead by example. And it's not just the example you set within the class. Behaviours should be consistently modelled both in and out with the class, because learners will pick up on that if there's any difference in how you're reacting and dealing with other members of staff within the college. But by changing and modifying your own behaviour and the way you interact with your learners, you can help foster a class atmosphere and relationship building which shows positive caring and respect for all. By perhaps discussing what they consider a good class atmosphere should be and what it would look like to them. Helping your learners to get to know each other on perhaps a slightly more personal level by using games and short activities to safely let them get to know one another. but also always making sure that they know and understand why they are playing these games and the purpose of those activities. That's absolutely critical. It's also important to plan lessons and activities that allow students to actively participate in the learning process, and this is where cooperative learning can definitely help. In terms of typical class lessons, in the past, and certainly in my own experience, they seem to fit into 2 or 3 different categories. You had typically competitive or individualistic lessons or learning, where there was none or limited interaction between students and or the individual member of staff or lecturer. There was no real accountability to others within the group, and individuals were only responsible for themselves and making sure that their own work was actually on track and handed in on time. And if any group work at all was included in the process, it was groups that were very similar that were put together, homogeneous groups. And normally what you would find is within that sort of social stratus within the class that develops, you would find there was 1 or maybe 2 learners who would readily adopt the role of the leader. And that sometimes would inhibit the process of other people stepping up and voicing their opinions within that construct. And the other thing that's really important in competitive or individualistic learning or lessons is that social skills are often assumed to either already exist for learners, or the development of these types of social skills are usually ignored, and the focus is very much in subject content. So cooperative learning actually bypasses those and does so much more for learners and their learning. But for an activity to actually classify or be classified as a true cooperative learning activity, there are a number of criteria that must be met. And cooperative learning relies on positive interaction, active interaction with others in the group. Being accountable to others is absolutely fundamental to the process, because that fosters that kind of group norming and also that shared drive towards achieving a goal. And it helps people and group members to be responsible as they work towards achieving those goals. Where groups are heterogeneous in nature, with individual differences and diversity seen as a positive strength and not a weakness, there are opportunities that can be tapped into to learn from others in a way that cannot be achieved in other types of groups. And the other key feature of cooperative learning is that social skills are actively taught and or developed directly during cooperative learning tasks and activities, and they're then reflected on. So it's not just the subject content that you're developing in terms of knowledge and understanding. And as such, cooperative learning can be seen to align very well with a variety of social learning theories and the work of Lev Vygotsky and also Bandura. So when it comes to the structure of learning, as I said, one of my colleagues will be running a webinar next month, which hopefully you'll sign up for as well, that will take you through a variety of different cooperative learning activities and explain those in more detail. But in many of these, the lecturer adopts a role ensuring that everyone is allocated a clearly defined or specific role within the group, and that they are clear about what their role entails. So on this slide here, you will see that we've actually got 5 key typical roles that are used in cooperative learning. The facilitator or harmonizer, the reporter recorder, a material manager or resource collector, somebody responsible for planning and or timekeeping, and sometimes the other one that's included is a quality checker. But other roles are also possible, so it's about identifying the different types of processes and skills that are needed to actually achieve a task. So ideally, as a lecturer, you should know your learners and you should encourage all your learners to work through and participate in all of these roles over a variety of weeks or months or years. And by knowing your learners well, you'll be in a really key position to decide when your learners are ready to be perhaps challenged by a role which goes against their more natural tendencies or predispositions. So it's for you as an individual tutor to depend and allocate those group roles. Depending on the size of the group and the overall complexity of the task, Individuals could also be given 2 roles where necessary, but you would want to consider the overall balance and what was required, so that perhaps planner or timekeeper and material manager are easier to combine than some of the other ones. So why do they use roles at all in cooperative learning? Well, the roles make group work more efficient. And I mentioned earlier on, this is highly structured group work. This is not just group work where everybody goes away, does their own thing, and hopes that everything will work out well in the end and they'll end up with an end product that does what it needs to. The roles make group work more efficient because students with a defined role have better access to the task. And by knowing what's expected of them, they're hopefully more likely to work with others to actually achieve that. It's also far more likely that everyone is active during group work if everyone has a specific and distinctly different role or function within the group. Again, as I said, nowhere to hide. Everybody's role is important, all different, but all important. And by considering who gets allocated which role, lecturers can also help ensure that more confident, or the students who perhaps tend to dominate class discussions and are first to answer things, are encouraged to give others more of a chance to participate and to develop their skills. And this makes it far more likely that the low-status students within any group participate more equally and are given opportunities to also develop their skills and confidences. So this webinar was talking about principles into practice. So we've talked about some of the key features of cooperative learning and also the underlying principles and the elements of cooperative learning. And if you are interested in this, CDN run a variety of workshops, and we're in the process of trying to pull together some online content which will help you develop your understanding of this topic in more depth, and hopefully that will be available on our CDN Learn Online platform by the end of next month. But when running or setting up cooperative learning groups, you really need to consider carefully the composition and the nature of the groups. And this includes considering the individual student skills, but also their status within the class. True cooperative learning tasks are rich or complex in nature, and they require a wide range of skills and experience to actually achieve that end output or that final goal. It's absolutely no use to ask students to work on a task which is relatively simplistic or which focuses on only 1 or 2 key skills or abilities. For example, a task or activity which would ask learners to answer a series of questions on a case study would not be sufficiently rich or complex, as the only really important ability or skill required to complete the task would heavily rely on their ability to read and write. In this case, the likelihood is that a student within the group who would normally do well and who enjoys reading and writing would take over the assignment or the task, and other students would simply sit back and defer, waiting more passively until the task was finished. And the interaction within the group would diminish. So a clear determinating feature of any cooperative learning task is that it requires full group interaction and cooperation to succeed. So make sure that any tasks that you are designing or using require a wide range of skills and expertise so that you can tap into that range and variety. As with all other learning approaches, the importance of setting the scene with learners is a critical part of cooperative learning. So pre-activity briefings should not only make the subject-specific skills that the learners will be developing during a cooperative learning activity clear, but you should also be focusing on the types of personal learning and other soft or interpersonal skills which individual learners could also be developing, so that they are thinking about these and considering how they are approaching and interacting with other students during any task. With the increasing focus on using the curriculum in learning to develop skills for learning, skills for life, and skills for work, I would actually argue that cooperative learning is a really useful approach to both highlight and also foster the development of skills that are also valued by employers, and that's a key aspect of our teaching and learning within colleges today. So linking back to the opening slide, the International Commission on Education for the 21st Century findings, learning to learn was the first of their 4 key pillars of learning, or 4 key objectives. And one of the key aspects of cooperative learning from my perspective as a teacher, myself in the past, was the opportunity to actually discuss and share the personal learning and the observations that had come out of that learning task with other students. Many courses and educational programs now include self-reflection as a key component of learning, and in some new courses it's actually an assessed part of learning. And things like research findings on assessment aids for learning and the work of Dylan Williams and Phil Race, etc., also stress the importance of not just reflection, but also using feedback for improving learning, whether that's feedback, feed forward, or feed up. And because cooperative learning approaches use group tasks and activities, there is also the additional benefits to learners of not simply just getting feedback from the individual lecturer about how they have performed, not simply self-reflecting on their own performance, but also of gaining valuable insights from their peers, complementing all of the other types of feedback and driving learning and personal learning and mastery of skills in the future. So in conclusion, cooperative learning is a teaching and learning approach that has a substantive research base. So there's lots of ways you can go in and you can look at the research that underpins this as a teaching and learning methodology, and you can see whether it's something that you feel would work in your own particular context. By participating and running cooperative learning type activities within your classroom, it is likely that your role as a lecturer may be slightly different, perhaps to some of the roles that you would normally take within classes. So it's more likely that you will be an observer, you will be setting up group activities, you'll be letting the cooperative learning activities running, watching people, watching their behaviours, picking up on what's happening, and then facilitating that discussion and that reflection and review at the end. And taking that step back from actually actively getting stuck in with the learners and their learning can actually be quite challenging at times for teachers. That's something I found myself when running some of these activities. Cooperative learning is also just simply one of a wider range of teaching and learning approaches that you can use. And it's really important to remember that it can take quite an amount of time to initially prepare and pre-plan and resource any cooperative learning group task. So this is an approach that won't necessarily suit every topic or every class that you teach, but it is an approach that has huge benefits for learners and their learning, and also driving and supporting class cohesion. And learners need to be adequately prepared to gain the most from any cooperative learning activity. And the learning opportunities that come out from any group task or activity should always focus on both subject and also interpersonal skills development and social or communication skills development. However, cooperative learnings can also help promote equity and support the development of anti-discriminatory behaviours and attitudes within your classes, as well as developing the creativity and critical thinking skills of both you and your learners. And for this reason, I think it is one of the most valuable tools in our toolkit.